thank you and welcome along to our council meeting tonight, being the Tuesday the 23rd of March 2021. This meeting is being recorded to improve access to the meeting for our community. The recording will be published and will be retained by council in accordance with council's legal obligations. If you submitted a question, your name and question will be recorded. We will be constantly live streaming. If it does stop for any reason, we will stop the meeting until it has been restarted. Thank you. I wish to begin by acknowledging the Bangarang as our original inhabitants on whose country we are gathered, and pay respects to their elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to any other First Nation people that may be watching tonight. Would we please stand for the opening prayer? Almighty God, we humbly ask Thee to bless and guide this council in its deliberation so that we may truly preserve the welfare of the people whom we serve. Amen. It's good to see everybody here tonight, so there's no apologies. We're all here. There's no citizenship ceremony. I'll just go to item number 7, which is the confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting. Do we have a mover to move the Councillor Dave Fuller and a seconder? Councillor Harvey Benton. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Any changes? That's all happy? Okay, all those in favour? The motion is carried. Item number 8 on our agenda is conflict of interest disclosures, and there are a few tonight. I myself will have to step out during 15.1, which is the petition for lack of drainage and footpath along Wilson Road. As a landholder in that area, I feel I have a direct conflict there and have signed the petition, so I will step out for the voting on that one. So thank you. I'll then move to Councillor Jack Herry. Jack, could you please state your conflict and item number, please?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Item 14.1, I have both a general and a material conflict of interest. The general conflict of interest being secondary to being a committee member with the Wangaratta Farmers Market, and the material conflict of interest being care of being a producer that sells through the farmers market.
Councillor Herry, are you happy to step out of the room and not vote in this?
Yes.
Correct. Councillor Harvey Benton, you have a couple of conflicts.
Yes,
please state them.
13.3, which is the livestock exchange deed. I have an association with one of the directors as an employer or associate.
Thank you.
Employer engagement. And 14.1 is similar to Councillor Herry's, that I'm a member of the Springers Recreation Reserve.
Thank you, and you too happy to step out and be a non-voting? Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody. Again, I'll get you to note your conflict when it comes to that item. Thank you. We'll move on to 9.1 and 9.2. Brendan, 9.1 first, petition regarding the rural city of Wangaratta's Register of Public Roads.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This item is dealing with a petition containing 42 signatures regarding Cousins Street, Vincent Road, Newman Street and Greta Road. And the recommendation as per our governance rules is that the petition be tabled or received tonight, and that the petition be referred to me for a report at a future meeting.
Thank you, Brendan. Can I have a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Grant, and a seconder? Councillor Bussell. Anybody like to talk on the roads register there? Councillor Bussell, no? Okay, I'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? So the recommendation is passed. Brendan, 9.2, petition regarding the traffic conditions and speed limits in Cheshunt on the Whitfield King Valley Road.
Yep. Similar to the previous item, we have a petition containing 112 signatories looking for changes to speed limits on the road in Cheshunt and Whitfield, and the recommendation, again in accordance with the governance rules, is that that be received tonight and be referred to me for a future report.
Thank you, Brendan. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Bussell and Councillor Fitzpatrick to second. Any councillor? Councillor Bussell, would you like to talk on this?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. With the large volumes of traffic that are coming to the King Valley, which is great, I do believe there is a problem in this area where the tourists are. And I'd go a little further and think we should be looking at the speed limits between Whitfield and Cheshunt. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors to talk? No. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you, Brendan. I'll move on to no hearing of deputation. Presentation of reports. Now, this is item number 11, and I'd like to have a notice of condolence for Uncle Freddie Dowling. So I seek the support for the following notice of condolence. The rural city of Wangaratta notes with sadness the passing of Bangarang elder Uncle Freddie Dowling. Uncle Freddie was a champion of his people and throughout his life made significant contributions to the furthering the cause of the Bangarang people. His contributions to the history of the Bangarang included authoring several books capturing stories of the past. We thank Uncle Freddie for the impact of his work, not just on the Bangarang people, but as an educator and as a leader of all the residents in the northeast. Thank you. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Fuller? Would anybody else like to talk on the notice there? No, I'll put that notice to the vote. All those in favour? The condolence is carried. Thank you very much. I'll move on to item number 13 under officers' reports, and 13.1 is the review of the procurement policy for public consultation. Thank you, Sarah.
Hang on.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Ash. I did have a council report under Ashley too. Thanks, Ash.
Thanks, you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to talk on this month we celebrated International Women's Day with the 2021 theme, Choose to Challenge. And in our community, I was quite proud we saw a number of community groups hold events advocating for women and girls and celebrating women's achievements. I want to make a special mention and thank the Women's Health Goulburn North East for organising the Women March for Justice. We chose to challenge on Monday the 15th of March, and we joined more than 500 people from across the Goulburn Valley and North East Victoria and over 100,000 people across the country to come out onto the streets and say enough is enough. We've had enough of the broader national culture in Australia that treats women and girls with disrespect. But I want to thank you to the men and to my colleagues in the room who came and stood beside us and support the Women's March for Justice. We will continue to take a stand against violence against women and to call for safety and justice for women and girls in all walks of life, in every workplace, every organisation and committee, every sporting team and every home. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick, for that report. No other councillor reports. I'll now move down to item 13. Sorry, Councillor Fuller.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to have that report noted in the minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Do I need a seconder for that? Councillor Herry, I was looking for. All those in favour? That report is carried and noted. Thank you very much, Councillor Fitzpatrick and Councillor Fuller. Third time lucky. Item 13.1, review of procurement policy for public consultation. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. So this is under the outgoing Local Government Act. Council is required to review its procurement policy on an annual basis, and this is the commencement of that annual review. So seeking councillors' endorsement to release the draft procurement policy for public exhibition and receipt of submissions up to Friday the 23rd of April. We'll then return to council to adopt an updated version if there are any submissions requiring change, or maintain the policy as it is. I'll just mention that under the new Local Government Act 2020, Council will be again required to update the procurement policy by December 2021. So for this review, we've just proposed to keep the policy as it is, and we'll have a broader review in December 2021 to make sure the procurement policy is updated to reflect the requirements of the new Act. So this time we're just going out on exhibition with the same policy that we adopted last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I have a mover for that, Councillor Herry, and then Councillor Grant as a seconder? Any councillor like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Bustle.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. I commend Sarah for this common sense approach here, rather than trying to rush a policy to do that later in the year. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Councillor Bustle. I'll put the recommendation to a vote if there's no further councillors to talk. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you. Sarah, 13.2, the updated instrument of delegation by council to members of council staff.
Thank you. So this report is presented to council to update the instrument of delegation to members of council staff. Many of the delegations actually are delegated from the CEO to members of council staff, but this specific document talks about items that are dictated by other acts and regulations. So it's where council delegates specific responsibilities to specific members of staff rather than via the CEO. And this is one of our regular updates to those delegations following legal updates that we receive of what needs to be amended. This time it's specifically relating to the Food Act and updating some of the delegations around that. So just seeking council's authorisation that these updated delegations come into force immediately, that the council common seal is applied and that we immediately revoke the previous instrument of delegations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I have someone put this on the table? Moved by Councillor Fitzpatrick, seconded by Councillor Grant. Would anybody like to talk on the recommendation? No. Put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Benton.
Yeah, I have a conflict of interest in 13.3, being an associate. One of the directors is an employee with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, reappointment of directors to the Wangaratta Livestock Exchange Proprietary Limited. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is to reappoint 4 of the 5 independent directors who form the Wangaratta Livestock Exchange Board to keep their memberships. Basically, some have either lapsed or are due to lapse, so it's a governance matter to reappoint those 4 directors for another 2 years. Just wanted to say also a big thank you to those individuals and the commitment that they have given to the Wangaratta Livestock Exchange, and acknowledge the time and dedication that they've given us. With Council's endorsement, we'd be then looking to sign and seal a record of this resolution for their reappointment as directors. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Bussell and Councillor Fuller to second it. Would anybody like to talk on the Livestock Exchange? Councillor Bussell, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to enforce what Director Brindley has said, that these people do give a lot to this organisation. And if you reflect back some years as to how it did run in the past and how it runs now, we've got a lot of thanks for these people that run this organisation. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank
you. Councillor Fuller.
Just simply echoing what Deputy Mayor Bussell just said in terms of their work to increase and to grow what's going on down at the Livestock Exchange. Thank you.
No, Councillor Bussell, nothing in reply? Nope. I'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Could we get Councillor Benton back in and turn his microphone off? Welcome back, Councillor Benton. It's been a long time without you. 13.4, Sarah, Governance Rules Amendment, please.
Thank you. Last report from me. This is presented to Council to commence the process of community engagement to update Council's governance rules. This is another change reflective of the new Local Government Act 2020 that actually updates the process by which the mayor and deputy mayor can be elected by their fellow councillors. It removes the tiebreaker process of election by drawing lots and replaces that with a more proactive process whereby councillors need to reach a proactive agreement. So this recommendation is seeking your endorsement that the governance rules go out for public exhibition, and again that we invite submissions for a period of 28 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can someone move that recommendation, please? Councillor Fuller and Councillor Grant will second it. Did anybody want to speak on the governance rules amendment there? No, you must be all happy. Councillor Grant.
Actually, all
Love
I
to
can
hear
say that it's a timely change and most appropriate. I'm glad to see it come through.
As opposed to the drawing out of the hat in the tiebreaker. Thank you, Councillor Grant. In that case, I'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you. 14.1, Jack Herry, please.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I have a conflict of interest on this item, general and material, general being a committee member and material being a producer with the Wangaratta Farmers Market.
Thank you. Councillor Benton? Microphone, please, Councillor Benton.
Have a conflict as a committee member of the Springhurst Recreation Reserve.
Thank you. Happy for you to go. Yeah. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. So this report is presented to Council tonight in regards to the Community Events Fund that was established as part of the Resilience and Recovery Program. So this program was put in place following the 2020 bushfires and then the compounding impacts of COVID, particularly in the King Valley area. So this fund in particular was established to help provide community support to organisations and businesses who were looking to establish community events or projects that would help to facilitate social gatherings and re-establish connections throughout the communities. We received 29 applications and one was deemed ineligible as it didn't meet the criteria. The recommendation before Council tonight is that all 28 of the eligible projects be awarded funding. It was funding up to $1,000 and the total amount is for $26,500 across the 28 projects.
Thanks, Jamie. Councillor Grant, would you like to move that recommendation? Okay, and a seconder, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Grant.
I'd like to say how much I support projects such as this. Being able to allocate money to community organisations, and particularly in the situation that these organisations found themselves in, recovering from the bushfire and then with COVID. I think we've given the opportunity for a lot of these organisations to take a step forward in recovery. It's a form of value adding, I think, that's really important, and I think if we can do this more often, when it's necessary obviously, but if we can do this more often, I think it's something that we need to consider. So happy to move it.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Fuller, did you want to say anything? I'd just like to ask a question to Director Chubb. 28 or 9 applications is such a good number for a community to have. Would you expect more or you expected less?
No, look, we were actually really happy with the number that we got through. So it's really exciting to see that there's that many projects out there that were ready to go, and they're ready to kick off quite quickly. So we'll start to see within the next couple of weeks some of these projects begin to be delivered. I think that for the first time around, this is actually a pretty strong number. Considering that the King Valley, that there's quite a small number of organised community groups up there. We're not talking like there's thousands of thousands, but what we do know is that the King Valley is incredibly active and connected, and I think that's reflected in the number of projects that we've seen. So,
thank you. Anybody else like to talk? Councillor Bassam.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I haven't got too much more to say. Councillor Grant stole all my words, so I can only support what Councillor Grant said. It is very, very important, and I'm incredibly proud of the people that were successful. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Grant, to close off.
Yes, just close off, what I also would like to say, I'm really pleased to see a real diversity of application as well. So it's you know, everything from schools to sporting groups to environmental groups to you know, social and musical groups. So it's you know, the broad spectrum of communities. So that again is a really positive thing.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, I'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Would we please get Jack and Harvey? Welcome back again, Councillor Benton. And microphone on again. And Councillor Herry, thank you. And thanks, Jamie. We'll go on to infrastructure services. 15.1, I'll have to step out of the room as I have a conflict of interest over that I have property in that area and have since signed the petition. I'll hand over to Councillor, I was going to say Benton, but Bussell, to step, Harry Bussell.
Thank you, Stephen. Sorry, Marcus.
So this is a petition for the lack of drainage and footpath along Wilson Road in Wangaratta. The petition has been reviewed by officers. There is an existing issue with both obviously having no footpath and drainage issues along that section of road that officers are aware of. The walking and cycling strategy has this listed for a design in next financial year and construction of the footpath, including some drainage works in the 22-23 financial year, dependent on budget allocations. Recommendation is to include the construction of the footpath and drainage along Wilson Road in the future years capital works program and respond to the first signatory.
Thank you, Marcus. Would somebody, Harvey, you'd like to move that?
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendations 1 and 2 and an additional point as per the walking and cycling strategy, list these works as high priority. The works be referred to the 2021-22 budget for the design and the 22-23 budget for consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Would somebody like to second that? Councillor Fitzpatrick, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Benton?
Yes, the last point is the reasoning that I think it gives the community out there some definite timeline that this council is going to make sure that they commit to it. It's not locking us in, but it's making sure that the community have some understanding, because I think it's been a long time coming for some of this works to be done in that area. And just if we get a little bit of a grant in between that time, I think we should apply for it. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Anybody else like to speak? Do you have anything else to add to that, Councillor Benton? Thank you. Could I see a show of hands, please? Thank you. Motion's carried. Louise, if you could let the mayor back in, please.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 15.2, petition for lack of maintenance at Pelican Court. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This petition was tabled at the February meeting, so it's requesting that new fences at the rear and the front of the park be erected, more planting of trees, placement of water taps, drinking fountains, etc. in the park as well. The main part to note here is that Council has an existing place-based strategy, and it clearly states that all urban residents ideally will have access to a park with an appropriate 10-minute walk. Excuse me. There are a number of parks within a 10-minute walk from this area, and council consider this to be a green space rather than a park. Council officers' recommendation is that we note that we will conduct some one-off additional maintenance in this area, including to the existing fence, trees and shrubs. We will request officers to review the green space for addition onto the tree planting register for the 21-22 financial year. Confirm that the green space does not require any additional services as per council's place-based strategy, and respond to the first signatory.
Thank you, Marcus. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Benton, and a seconder, Councillor Herry. Anybody like to talk on the recommendation moving forward? No. Put the recommendation that Marcus has read out to a vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you. 15.3, the Wangaratta Clay Target Club site rehabilitation works. Thanks, Marcus.
So this report is presented to council recommending the award of the contract for the Wangaratta Clay Target Club site rehabilitation. So this is a long-running project. In 2016, the EPA issued the Wang Target Club with a clean-up notice. Clean-up works have been completed on the North Wangaratta Recreation Reserve, and now it's time for the Wang Target Club to have their area tidied up and cleaned up. This project is funded through the Department of Environment, Land and Water and Planning. Recommendation is that council awards the contract to Enviro Pacific, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign and seal documents, appoints the Chief Executive Officer to the Superintendent, and discloses the contract price.
Thank you, Marcus. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Benton, and a seconder, Councillor Bustle. Councillor Benton, would you like to talk as the mover?
Thanks, Councillor Mayor. Yes, this is no doubt, as Marcus has highlighted, a very long time since this started. I think I went to the first meeting out there in 2016, and it's going in now, coming into the 5 years of these clubs, and the community have been put under an enormous amount of, and I don't think there's any other organisation would have put up with what they've had to put up with going through. At least where they can find some light at the end of the tunnel of the bureaucracy that's gone on to try and get to this point is just be up and beyond a joke. And I think it's it's a very time, and I think a lot of people will be very pleased the day that starts to operate out there without any impediments and coming forward, because they certainly need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ben. Would any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation? No. Okay, thank you. We'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? Thank you. The recommendation is carried. Marcus, would you disclose the contract price?
Yes, it's $1,022,047.86.
Thank you, Marcus. We'll move on to Development Services 16.1, Planning Scheme Amendment Request for Reeds Road Equine Precinct. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is about a proposed planning scheme amendment relating to land known as the Reeds Road Equine Precinct. The planning scheme, as it currently applies to that precinct, limits land uses mainly to those related to thoroughbred horse racing and training. The requested planning scheme amendment, if successful, will change the planning scheme to allow for a broader range of equine uses in that precinct. The officer's recommendation is that include that council considers the request to amend the Wangaratta planning scheme, and that council seeks authorisation from the Minister for Planning to prepare and exhibit the planning scheme amendment. Seeking authorisation from the Minister for Planning is the first step in the planning scheme amendment process, and if successful, the next step will be publicly exhibiting that amendment.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I have a mover for this, please? Councillor Bustle, and a seconder, Councillor Herry. Would anybody like to firstly talk? Councillor Bustle, as the mover, would you like to talk first or not?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, I want to see development in Wangaratta. I think it's very important. And as this sits at the moment, I don't think it will ever get developed. So I'm going to support the start of this process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Benton, you've got your mic on.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I will support this amendment application for that area out there, because it intrigues me how it got to this stage in the first place, for that to be locked in to the development that was never happened anyway. I will say that one reservation I have going forward with it is the proposed manure handling project that's been highlighted, and understanding that it will come back for further examination at a further point. I have reservations about it, but I will judge that when that burning permit if it ever comes back on its merits going forward. But I just like to put that point out there.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Any other councillor? Councillor Grant?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, this has been a fairly difficult process, and I think it was one of those proposals that I think got the support of a special use zone simply because it somehow didn't fix any particular box. I still have some concerns about it. It was sold as something that was going to build on the equine industry in Wangaratta. It hasn't realised that. Hopefully with the loosening of the conditions, it might allow it to do that. I've got some real reservations about the compost processing, because that sounds fairly strong, but I'm perhaps reassured by the fact that it's got to come back to council and seek planning approval. But I hope it doesn't get slip through the cracks, because sometimes these things do. I'll give it my tacit support, given that it could realise the potential that obviously the developers think it has. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. No other... Jack? Councillor Herry?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Just to build on Councillor Bustle's remarks, it would be good with the equine facility down on Tone Road to see some further development in this area. And as Stephen remarked, it is very early in the planning process, and any activity in relation to that manure processing and composting, if it did come to that, would indeed be a Type 2 permit that would, Type 2 use which would trigger a permit, and there would be appropriate decisions made at that point. So I think that's worth noting.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd also like to add, it's still going to be a special use zone. It's just lightened up a couple of minor conditions. Horse is a horse. Whether it's a thoroughbred or a pony, it's still a horse. So to get this development up off the ground, I will ask a question directly to you, Director Swart, without notice. You're saying that it's got to go then, this will start that process off of going out to public exhibition. It could be called in by the Minister if directed to by, if asked to by the owner, and the Planning Minister agreed. He could call it in without going through that process because they are such minor changes.
Yes, that's a possibility. The Minister for Planning could make that decision.
Okay,
Yes.
that's all I wanted to hear. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Director Swart. I think that's Councillor Bussell as the mover of that recommendation. Could you, nothing further to say? I'll put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you. 16.2 is the Planning Scheme Amendment C81, consideration of the panel report.
Thank you. This item is about a planning scheme amendment. It's C81, and it proposes to make changes to the Wangaratta planning scheme to implement the Wangaratta Urban Waterways Flood Investigation Report. The planning scheme amendment has been exhibited and submissions were considered by an independent panel. The panel recommended that planning scheme amendment C81 should be adopted with changes, and those changes included that the flood study should not be referenced in the planning scheme in its current form, and that council should undertake some further work to account for climate change before that document is referenced in the planning scheme, and also making some mapping changes and a few changes to the proposed overlays. In terms of the officer's recommendation, it includes, and it's on the screen and in the council agenda, it includes that council considers the Wangaratta Planning Scheme Amendment C81 panel report and adopts the planning scheme, adopts the planning scheme amendment, as recommended by the panel, with the exception of one thing, and that is where panel is recommending that council should not reference the study at this point in time. The officer's recommendation is to reference the study at this point in time. The officer's recommendation, I believe, is in line with the intent of the panel report, in that it will ensure that important background information is available that explains how the planning provisions were produced and how they were implemented into the planning scheme. And it also puts council into a position to commit to the further strategic work that the panel is recommended. And it allows a simple process to be available to reference the further work once it's completed.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Benton, and a seconder. Councillor Grant. Would anybody like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Benton first.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I can remember when this study started initially. It wasn't the start of the amendment process, but at the start of the study, and I can remember the discussion we had around the development we weren't able to do around the airport because of flooding, and I think some of these facts and figures that have come out of this report will change, and there'll be some people will be impacted and some people will be alleviated from the impaction of the further development. And and it's been some time, this report coming together, and it says in there the modelling has been accurate with the information they have had over the past years to be able to get to the point they are at the moment. And an adjustment for climate change could, in my mind and a layman's mind, would be probably quite minimal in relationship to what has been already put on in the modelling at the moment. And I think it's would be, and it's, I should say, it's great to see that it's going to be able to be adopted now so we can utilise the plan. And I also will note that the panel didn't agree with one of the submitters in relation to the insurance industry, but the insurance industry relies on our planning scheme for some of their premiums. And I know very well personally they do that, and it relates to the flood insurance policies. So it'll give some people some relief. Whether and that's just an addendum to the benefit and the holistic approach that these things can affect people. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Would anybody else like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Herrick, please.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I think it's very important to have up-to-date information, and especially regarding mapping of flooding, and this up-to-date information will help with removing some administrative burden for council resources. It's definitely important, and Director Swart made point of noting that there is further work and studies yet to be done, and that will be providing more information with respect to climate change and the impact that that might have upon flooding in our flood-prone region. So until such information that comes out of that study is at hand, it would be prudent, definitely, to be cautious in making determinations upon any significant strategic matters that might be impacted by flooding.
Thank you. Any other councillor like to talk? Pardon me? So just quickly, I'm in support of the changes, and I see the recommendations on page 7 of the panel's report that they're happy with the changes of the overlay maps, but except for a few minor exceptions. But the flood study report and the changes to the LSI schedule as proposed by Golden Murray Water have been rejected. I also point out that the panel say that this document shouldn't be used as a reference guide there in the report, because it is accurate today, but once it's approved and done in the future, is it going to be accurate without changes happening to it over that time? So I'm not in great support of that, but I put to my fellow councillors the balance of that. So, Councillor Benton, that's the end of me. Would you like to finish off as the mover of the recommendation?
Oh, no, I think, yes, all I'd like to just say is what we were told before, that it'll be a background document, and would have been a background document in the previous, and that's a little bit of a, to be referenced, it'll still only be a background document, even if we've done the climate change. But that could take years, and I think to leave it to that length of time, we've already gone 5 years in relationship to the flood overlay we've got now that does impact council property that we're not allowed to develop unless we can get some clearance with this flood overlay, e.g. the airport.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. That's all. Councillor Benton closed out the debate, so I'd put the recommendation to a vote. All those in favour? The vote is carried. 16.3, Wangaratta Economic Development and Tourism Advisory Committee appointments to the committee. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. This item's about the membership of the Wangaratta Economic Development and Tourism Advisory Committee. 3 vacancies currently exist on the advisory committee. We went through a expression of interest process recently to try and fill those 3 vacancies, and we received 5 applications in response. Applications were assessed against a skills matrix which ensures adequate representation across a number of sectors and aims to fill skills gaps identified for the committee. It's recommended, the recommendation is on the screen, and it's recommended that the council appoint 3 of the applicants to the committee.
Thank you, Stephen. Can I have a mover? Councillor Grant to move the recommendation, and Councillor Fitzpatrick to second it. Councillor Grant, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Absolutely. Well, you know, firstly to say congratulations to the people that are successful, but also to thank those that actually put themselves forward for consideration. Always difficult when everyone's got, you know, great skills and, you know, got much to offer, and hopefully with the new membership we can revitalise the board, the committee at least, and get some good feedback, because we rely on that community feedback to inform some of the decisions that we as council make around economic and tourism development. So,
please, can you mention the names as your recommendation?
Successful candidates are Anna Stevenson, Rowena Tainton and Sandro Camillo. So on behalf of council, I'd like to congratulate those people for their success and thank them for their candidacy.
Thank you, Councillor Grant, for moving that recommendation with those names. Would anybody else like to talk on the recommendation? No? If there's nothing further, I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour of accepting? The motion is carried. Recommendation. Thank you. Thanks, Irene. Special committees reports. Advisory, I'll move on to 19.1, which is record of advisory committees reports. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Mayor. We have just one set of minutes from advisory committee meetings to consider this month, and those are from the Arts, Culture, Events, Heritage Advisory Committee meeting of January, and those are there for your noting.
Thank you. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Fuller, and a second to Councillor Fitzpatrick. Councillor Fuller, did you want to talk on that?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, thank you, to acknowledge the new members and the productive nature of the conversation in terms of getting to know who had joined us and where we're headed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Anyone else like to talk on the recommendation? Put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll move on to item 20.1, which is a notice of motion number notice of motion number 66 by Councillor Dave Fuller. Dave, would you like to talk on the notice of motion, please?
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you. Just the background, during the election campaign for the 2020 local government elections, the Victorian Pride Lobby called on candidates to examine the potential for 5 pledges to assist and support the LGBTIQA+ community. In conjunction with that, some candidates made full or partial commitment to these pledges, and during the symbolic month of March, in which we acknowledge Mardi Gras and International Women's Day, in order to lead and progress this conversation, I'm asking for support from my colleagues with this motion that Council undertakes the following actions. Support our partnership for the Rainbow Ball and its associated agencies, both financially and in kind where appropriate and reviewed annually. Initiate a diversity and inclusivity reference group or advisory committee with applicable terms of reference. Ask this group to prepare a submission to Council as part of budget and Council plan process to initially consider A, application of a form of the rainbow flag to relevant public facilities and potentially on social media platforms, particularly on significant days. B, support for appropriate members of the community to participate in relevant LGBTQIA+ functions and events, either virtually or in person. C, to consider resources and the ability for Council as an organisation to consider undertaking the Rainbow Tick accreditation process. D is utilising the Youth Development Officer and the Youth Council in conjunction with relevant agencies to investigate resources required for an open conversation in the community to identify gaps in diversity and inclusivity, and particularly for the younger people. And E, subsequent conversations required to ensure our community is supportive, accessible, inclusive for all, with a report on this due to Council in the second quarter of the new financial year. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Grant.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I support the notice of motion in part.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. You haven't got a seconder, you haven't got a motion.
No, I haven't got a seconder yet, but is Councillor Grant doing an alternate motion or just an amendment?
Doing an alternate motion.
Okay.
I thought it was intended to be an amendment.
No,
So, you've only... Rightio. Sorry, that's correct. Can I have a seconder for the current motion, Councillor Fitzpatrick? Sorry, now I'll hand over to Councillor Grant. No, you put an alternate motion in now. We can come back to that motion if this motion doesn't get up.
Okay, that the Council undertake the following actions. Support our partnership with the Rainbow Ball and its associated agencies, both financially and in kind where appropriate, reviewed annually. Initiate a diversity and inclusivity reference group or advisory committee with the applicable terms of reference, and ask this group to prepare a submission to Council as part of the budget and Council plan. I also want to add that a report be provided back to Council for consideration from this particular group. I'm putting this...
Just before we go, do we have a seconder for Councillor Grant's amendment?
I'll second it for debate, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, continue now as the mover.
And I'm putting this alternate motion forward to say that it's important to remember that it's Council's role to support, provide structures through advisory groups, advocacy, grant support, to allow the community groups to flourish, and we should focus on inclusivity, not exclusivity, and ensure that the decisions that we make reflect our community and our community plan above all. And we should put the focus on wellbeing for everybody. So that's why I have presented this alternate motion.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. It's a very similar motion. You've just left out a few things off it there, which is fine. Would anybody else like to talk on the alternate motion moving forward for Councillor Grant? It is an amendment. I did say that. Didn't I say for the amendment? Oh, sorry. It's an amendment. Sorry, it is an amendment to the original motion. Sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. Sorry, would anybody else like to talk on the amendment on the motion, Councillor Grants? I'm going to put the amendment to a vote. If the vote's not carried, it'll go back to the original motion that Councillor Fuller first said. So all those in favour of Councillor Grant's motion? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. The motion is not carried. We'll go back to the original motion. Councillor Fuller. So we had Councillor Fuller move the original motion. Councillor Fitzpatrick, correct? Moved as a seconder. Councillor Fuller, would you like to talk?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a conversation that has a beginning for me in 1993 as a 12-year-old. It has been reinforced more recently by the state-led body that asked us as candidates to look at support, particularly for the LGBTIQA+ community members. It takes courage to now stand here and ask the community to join it. It takes courage for young people living in our community to tell us about their experiences and ideas. And it takes courage for the older generations to be open and to listen to these conversations. This motion doesn't ask for a direct change in values or beliefs, but for a greater understanding of the intricately embroidered threads that make up the tapestry of our wonderful community. It is a mechanism to open the conversation, to identify gaps, and to work collaboratively to build a more inclusive, progressive and aware community. To seek ways to celebrate and acknowledge the growing diversity of our great community. And above all, rather than working in silos, for Council to work alongside relevant agencies and the community to challenge inequality in our municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Would anybody else like to talk on this recommendation?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. The motion, as originally moved by Councillor Fuller, definitely does continue an ongoing conversation, and it provides a fantastic opportunity to establish a community reference group providing voice and greater self-determination for LGBTQIA+ people in our community. What's suggested in the motion is a very open process, choosing to engage the community as decision makers, which I think possesses great merit.
Thank you, Councillor Herring. Anybody else like to talk on the recommendation before I pass Councillor Fitzpatrick?
Yeah, I just would like to echo my fellow colleagues, Councillor Herry and Councillor Fuller, and I would be really excited just to have these open conversations and hear where this reference group want to lead these conversations, because I'd be interested to hear from them, which is most important. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick. Any other councillors like to talk? Councillor Grant, again?
Well, the only thing that I would say is that I think the motion is not actually a reflection of our community plan, but rather more of the agenda of a city-based lobby group, and because of that I do have concerns about the way we're approaching this whole process. And I think, you know, to actually ask the community to tell us what they would like to see, I think would be a significant step forward. So that's my view of that.
Could you push that button again, Councillor Grant? Councillor Benton, did you want to say anything? I see your microphone on.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I will support this motion now at this point, but I will, over my lifetime, found that more people that want to identify themselves become a more divided society. Until we find the commonalities, and I know the word there, inclusive, but if we find the commonalities between all these groups, we should be able to build on that, instead of starting to point out the factors and differences between one another. Until we can get to a point where we can just see people as a human being and be respected that way, and the respect is you earn the respect. The receivers of the wanting to receive the respect have to earn it. And I think until we get to a point that has got to be put out there, and there'll no doubt there'll be people out there that'll say, yes, I didn't get respected for whatever reason. Through my lifetime, I've had a few knocks, and I've gone through a period of that through my lifetime. So I just plead with whatever comes out of this, we find the commonalities between us and we build on it, and we just don't end up with a lot of words and a lot of grandstanding. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ben. Before I go back to Councillor Fuller, I'd just like to point out too that apart from 1, 2 and 3, A, B, C, D and E are purely reference points on which to start a conversation. They might get struck off straight away by the reference group. They might not be points of discussion that want to move any further past, do you think we should move on this? So A, B, C and D could turn into all the way to Z with different ideas and situations moving. These are just a reference point to start conversation going and could completely change and not be included at all It will come back to us in the future, and I look forward to it coming back. I look forward to supporting the motion. Councillor Fuller, would you like to end?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quite simply, in leading and progressing this conversation with my colleagues, I hope we can aim to put an element of human back into the word humanity, and to do it in a positive, resourceful, respectful and considerate way, and most importantly, to be kind in our community. Thank you, Brendan and the team, for working on this with me, and also thank you to my colleagues for considering it.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you. We will now move on to 21 urgent business. There is none, and I will move on to public question time. I will read the first public question, and it is a question submitted by Brian Fox. Mr. Mayor, I believe this is our last chance to be funded by Vic Rail. I am asking, would Council consider exerting whatever pressure it feels appropriate in Vic Rail to fund the opening of the Templeton Street Railway crossing as a replica of the Sicily Avenue crossing, which accommodates both vehicular and pedestrians? My second part of this question is, would Council consider advising Vic Rail our preferred option is to install a pedestrian level crossing as an alternative to the proposed tunnel walkway at Cusack and Docker Streets? I have yet to see a satisfactory underground pedestrian crossing anywhere in Australia or internationally. And if any councillor or officer of the rural city of Wangaratta has seen such a structure that they would like to see replicated in Wangaratta, could they please raise their hand and verbal the address, remembering they are on audio and video and we publicly virtually attendance. Both my question are predicated by the fact that there is a building boom on both sides of Yarrawonga Road, which will put enormous pressure on the underpass in Rowan Street to accommodate the vehicular traffic. I would hope that by having brightly illuminated pedestrian level crossings, that many city employees and students would park their cars on the west side of the railway line and walk to work, which would save them driving across the railway line twice a day. Could I look to you, Marcus Goonan, for a response, please?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll answer both those questions in one. So Council is still in contact with Australian Rail Track Corporation, ARTC, who are actually completing these works. Very early on in the process, there was a proposal for an at-grade crossing to be considered. ARTC took that away, spoke to the rail authorities, and it was quite clear that the rail authorities would not allow an at-grade crossing due to a significant number of safety concerns anywhere within Victoria, let alone just in Wangaratta. There's obviously a clear state direction to remove railway crossings, not install more. Council adopted a position to support a well-designed all-abilities underpass at the January 19 special council meeting. We are still working with ARTC to see exactly what that underpass will look like, and we will receive final plans or some future plans within the next month or so, and continue to review that with council.
Thank you, Marcus. Marcus is our Director of Development Services.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure Services. Pretty close. It's services, isn't it? Thank you, Marcus, for your input there. Councillor Grant, could you please read a question by Ross Moore, of which I will answer in reply to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a question in 5 parts, and I'll take it one part at a time.
Thank you.
This is from Ross Moore, and he's got questions for Council on the leasing of the Bar Reserve Community Centre to the organisation called the Academy. Part 1 is, why has the Bar Reserve Community Centre been leased to a commercial enterprise, resulting in a loss of amenity for the local sporting and community groups who have utilised this area over the years?
Thank you, Ross Moore. Council has entered into an MOU, not a lease, with Goulburn Ovens TAFE to deliver the Academy Education Program. The program focuses on providing alternate education for young boys, many of whom are disengaged with traditional education. It is planned that once established, the centre will provide education for 50 boys across years 11 and 12. GoTAFE is the largest vocational educator provider in regional Victoria and is a not-for-profit organisation. The community centre is a perfect location due to its position in the Wangaratta Sports Precinct, right next door to Wyzak and footy ovals, and near the Murray Bushrangers home ground. The students will be completing gym sessions at Wyzak and utilising the pools from Monday to Friday. They will also be completing daily football skills sessions on the oval and is the key component of its curriculum. It is a safe space for students to attend each day, and the location allows ease of access to public transport for those who are making the commute. The sports precinct provides a strong connection to the community and will ensure that the students build strong links to community as part of the completion of the VCAL curriculum. Thank you, Irene.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And part two of the question from Ross Moore is, were the current users of this facility consulted over the change in use, and was there any feedback discussed at council or considered by council officers?
Thank you again. Council users were contacted to discuss the use of the centre. Booking information from last several years was also reviewed. Access to the canteen and change rooms will not change for sporting groups. It is acknowledged that there will be some loss of access to the hall space for sporting groups who have previously used the community centre throughout their sporting season. Council will work with these groups and clubs to find alternate venues and spaces that suit their needs. The Wyzak Centre will have meeting spaces, gym space and stadium space available to service some of these uses, and the alternate venues across the precinct will also be available. There will be no impact to access to any of the grounds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Part three of Mr Moore's question is, were City Councillors informed of the planned change in use prior to a lease being offered to the commercial enterprise?
Thank you again. The schedule of use and the proposed changes to the access were discussed by council officers and councillors prior to an MOU with TAFE being developed.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Part four of the question from Mr Moore. Has council adhered to its leasing and licensing policy, and in particular adhering to the stated policy directive of ensuring that land and facilities provided by council are accessible and equitable, that generally a competitive selection process will apply to granting tenures? Was public notice given, and did the director have authority to award tenure, given that the academy is neither a voluntary or a not-for-profit organisation?
Thank you again, Mr Moore. Good question. It has been an MOU established between council and GoTAFE as clarified. TAFE is a not-for-profit organisation. The presence of the Academy Education program within the centre will significantly increase the use of the space. The centre will now be used 5 days per week during school terms. All sporting clubs will maintain access to the canteen and change room as per current arrangements. The availability of the Academy Education program will provide vital alternate education options to our young boys. These kinds of education options have been identified and incredibly important for our community in Wangaratta. Young people aged 19 who have attained Year 12 or equivalent is only 75.9% compared to 88.2% for the state of Victoria. 25.6% of young people in Years 7 to 9 reported bullied in Wangaratta compared to 17.5% for Victoria, and 4.4% of young people aged 16 to 24 received an unemployment benefit compared to 2.5% for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Point 5 from Mr Moore. Were the previous booking managers of the facility, the YMCA, directed not to take bookings for the facility for a period of time?
The previous management organisation, the YMCA, has never instructed to stop or reduce bookings. COVID restrictions from mid-2020 meant that the use of many facilities were definitely limited. Thank you, Mr Moore, for your questions. And thank you, Councillor Grant. There's no confidential business, so that draws a close to the end of our meeting. I look forward to our next meeting in April, where more points will come up for discussion, and I encourage all people of the community, if you have a question for councillors, please make them available prior to our council meeting for discussion. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your attendance, councillors and directors, and look forward